Hi, I'm Amy Koranek, a Sculpey brand ambassador. I'm in the Sculpey studio today to show you this advanced project. It includes recycled materials, mixed media elements, and all kinds of cool surface techniques to make a tool caddy for all your polymer clay tools. We're starting our advanced project for a tool caddy made out of recycled or upcycled pieces and mixed media and all kinds of cool surface techniques. So what I've laid out here in front are the surface techniques that we're going to make. And we will make each one step by step, but I want you to see the goal of what we're looking for. This one is made with a stencil and gilder's paste. This one was made with a stencil and liquid Sculpey, and this one was made with a Sculpey silkscreen and liquid Sculpey. So I'm going to walk you through those so that you can make them too. But first I want you to know that for a project like this, it's kind of good to start with these surface treatments first, because we want time for the gilder's paste to dry and for the liquid Sculpey to sort of have a few minutes to leach into the background clay. In this case, the background clay is all souffle. This is jade mixed 1-to-1 with igloo. This one is bluestone mixed 1-to-1 with igloo. And this one is cornflower mixed 1-to-1 with igloo. So that's how I got my colors. We're also going to be adding in a little bit of guava that is not tinted with igloo, it's just straight guava. We are also going to be using concrete, just solid concrete, for our base underneath to hold the whole thing and give it strength. So do these first so that they can sit and the liquid Sculpey can leach into the clay. You could even let them sit overnight, would be even better, so they have time to leach in and be so that you can handle them and not smear them. So let's start with this bluestone one. Bluestone igloo 1-to-1 mix, and the sizes are also important. We're doing a three tower caddy, and we're going to have a 5-inch tower, a 4-inch tower, and I'm going to show you how to cut this one to a 3-inch tower. So I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes. So this tower is the tallest one, and I picked 5 inches as my tallest tower because generally that's how wide smaller pasta machines are, and so I didn't see any point in going taller than 5. Also, let's do a quick check to make sure we can wrap this with a sheeted, you know, all the way to the width of the pasta machine, and that's going to be plenty of clay. We can even stretch it a little bit right here when the time comes. So you want to focus on the size of your sheets before you sheet them completely, so that you can control the shape of your rectangle of clay to make sure that you can cover your towers. All right, this is the first process, and I used just a simple hexagon or beehive type stencil, and I'm just going to tack it down using finger pressure to get it to bite into the clay, and then I'm going to roll over it with my roller. And what I'm going for is I want the clay to come up into all those little windows until it's level with the top of the plastic stencil, so there's no gaps between the stencil itself and the clay. That's what I'm going for. All right, next we need to talk about how I made my color. So this is white liquid Sculpey in the bottom of my mixing cup. This is about a half of a 1 ounce bottle, so a ½ ounce of white liquid Sculpey in the bottom, and this cup does have measuring marks on the side, and half of a 1 ounce bottle would be about 15 milliliters, is that right? Yeah, 15 milliliters. And to that I'm just going to add a couple drops of black liquid Sculpey. So this is totally a custom color that I made up. Remember I said we're using concrete later on under the base, and I think that a light gray is just a really nice color to go over the tops of all these souffle colors that I custom created. So I just wanted to pick out a color that was, you know, universally good for each of my base colors and go from there. I'm using the spoony portion of the stir stick that comes in the silicone mixing set. And you know what? I'm gonna add one more black dot. It's because I want this to really show up on the camera for you. So that is going to be the liquid Sculpey that we need for the silk screen and for the other stencil. For this stencil, I'm going to do Gilder's paste. So we're just mixing this up, and then we're going to set it out of the way for just let it sit for a few seconds. Okay. So for the Gilder's paste, which comes like this, it's sort of a little putty in a very short can, and it comes in lots of colors, and it works really well with oven baked clays, and you just can smear it on. This is very similar to like how you would apply mica powder, or you would apply any kind of chalk, and it's very complementary to the color of liquid Sculpey that we just mixed. And so when I mixed up my liquid Sculpey, I also considered how it looked against this, and you can see that it's a really comparable match. But I wanted to give you more tips of other things that you can use besides liquid Sculpey for our mixed media aspect. So that's why I chose this Gilder's paste. But like I said, you could substitute mica powder or chalk, any kind of powders. So that is how that is done. So easy. You can put it on as thick as you'd like or as thinly as you'd like, and then it will dry to a tack on the surface of the clay. Okay, so that's the Gilder's paste. Now you're going to want to be sure and clean up, yourself after you do each veneer. I would let this veneer sit for as long as possible before you use it. We're peeling the stencil back to reveal that beautiful, really pretty design that we've got. And we'll just set this one aside. Now the stencil, you can clean that. What I would do is I would rub as much of that Gilder's paste off with a paper towel as I possibly can. And then I would wash it with soap and water. Okay, so I need a place to offload this. This one's going to sit for a while, so I'm just going to put it out of sight. Okay, next let's look at making another stenciled piece, but with also, we're going to make this one, and we're going to make that with liquid Sculpey instead of the Gilder's paste. So this one is the cornflower blue mixed 50% with white, 1-to-1 ratio, not 50%, but 1-to-1. So I did half a brick of each color is what I did, and that gave me a whole brick's worth of sheet. By the way, these sheets are all rolled out on the third thickest setting through my pasta machine, and the reason I did that was so that I had plenty of real estate to wrap around my towers, and also you want to keep these all the same thickness. That's really important because later when we build the base for our little tower caddy, you want them to all be the same thickness so that they work well together in sort of like a patchwork. So this is another stencil, and I'm rolling it down to make sure that the designs get level with each little window. And when I look through the stencil, I can see that there's very few air bubbles between the stencil and the clay. All right, now I'm going to bring in that liquid Sculpey that we made earlier, and I'm going to just put some of this over the stencil with my little spoonie. I could pour it, but I really don't want to get too much. We can always add more if we need it. Okay, now what I like to do is work this also with my fingertip. It cleans off of your hands so easily that it's not really a concern. So I just work it in different directions to make sure it's filling all the little windows of the stencil. So that's your first goal, is to get all the windows filled, and then we'll go back and make it look more even. I think we need to add a little bit more right down here. Spread that around with my fingertip as best as I can. Look at it from different angles. Make sure it's filling all the little wells. This is going to be my medium-sized tower, and so I wanted to make sure I used a pattern that would be good for the 4-inch tower, and since this stencil is just a little wider than 4 inches, that this is going to work out perfectly. So I used a bigger stencil for the 5-inch tower, and now I'm using a little bit narrower stencil for the 4-inch tower. Okay, once you've got it evenly distributed, you could just go back and tap like this, and that helps to settle the liquid Sculpey into the windows in a more even situation. If you don't want to though, you could leave it with the swirls that we did with the finger. You could do more than one liquid Sculpey at a time and make an ombre pattern. That would be so pretty. But I like to do this to just let it settle. All right, now that one is ready to reveal our cool pattern. What a great stencil, and it looks so pretty with that liquid Sculpey coming through. All right, the care of this stencil would be, please wipe off as much liquid Sculpey as you can. You could use paper towel, or if you squeegeed it off, you could probably put it back in your little cup for keeping. And then once it's wiped with paper towel, you may or may not need to use a little rubbing alcohol to remove the whole rest of the, the residue. They're so easy to clean from liquid Sculpey. I'm cleaning my fingers, and then we're going to go to our third veneer. So just picking this one up and setting it out of the way. All right, our third veneer is this beautiful Sculpey silkscreen with the feathers. This is my favorite silkscreen of all time. And so this is going to be my shortest tower. And so the shortest tower is only 3 inches. So that works really well because the Sculpey silkscreen is quite a bit narrower than the other pieces that I've made. So now I know that liquid Sculpey through a Sculpey silkscreen works really well. I cannot speak to every silkscreen, so you're going to want to test that. One side of the silkscreen just feels a lot smoother. One side feels rougher. Put the smooth side down and burnish it with your fingers. Beautiful. I love this silkscreen so much. And we're going right back in with our same color of liquid Sculpey. And I'm applying this the same way that I did through the stencil. In fact, I'm kind of treating this silkscreen more like a stencil than a silkscreen. I'm not going to squeegee it. I'm just going to tap it in place just like I did the other piece. So just adding enough to feel like I'm, getting a good coverage. And I'm going in here with my fingertip and spreading it around, distributing it. We can add more if we want to in just a minute. Just making sure I've got all the details covered. You can drag it through too, but don't squeegee it. I've tried that before, and liquid Sculpey is not like acrylic paint. It has a lot more tack to it, and when I tried using this with a squeegee, it tended to remove way too much liquid Sculpey, so that was disappointing. So I've taught myself how to do just this application with my finger, and then after all the little openings are filled, we're going to tap it like we did that last piece. Okay, so now it's all in place, and like I said before, this tapping motion really helps the liquid Sculpey to settle and to kind of make, if it has a pattern to it, it's going to be really random. But looking back where I've already tapped, you can see that it really leaves no pattern at all and just helps distribute the liquid Sculpey. So I'm going to let that set for just a second while I wipe off my hands, and then we'll peel and reveal. Okay, because this is a silk screen and it's a little bit more difficult to clean for reuse than the stencils are. I'm going to show you. I have a water tray here. It's a deli tray that I've got. I use this a lot with silk screens, and I put water in it, but this time I actually have rubbing alcohol in this tray, because water will not remove liquid Sculpey, but rubbing alcohol will. So I've got rubbing alcohol, and I'm soaking the silk screen in it. And if you look here, you can see how easily, if I actually go in there with some agitation, you can just see the screen coming clean with the alcohol. Now, really, I've let this one's been sitting in here for a little bit. I would not do that. I would put the screen right in there, clean it, and get it out. And then after I clean it with rubbing alcohol, I would rinse it off with water. And that's what I'm trying to say is I don't know that every silk screen can do this, but the Sculpey ones can. So I'm just getting a needle tool so that I can just pull up the edge of this. And, oh, it's so pretty. I just love that. I love that feather design. I just love it. Okay, I'm putting that right in my alcohol bath. And then I would just submerge it, and like I said, don't let it soak in there like it appears I'm doing. Sculpey will give me another one if I need it, but take good care of your screens and they'll take good care of you down the road. So clean them, rinse them, and then dry them and put them away. All right, so now we have our 3 veneers ready, and like I said, the whole point of doing that first was so that these can, the liquid Sculpey and the gilder's paste can kind of leach into the clay before we go on to build the towers. All right, now that you've got your veneers made, let's focus on prepping our little towers for the whole construction, and that will also give our veneers time, you know, to leach into the background clay. So I have my 5-inch tower and my 4-inch tower. Those are already cut. I'm going to show you how to cut the 3-inch tower, and then I'll talk about how these 2 towers I went ahead and painted with this coordinating paint. I happen to use Folk Art Enamel's Hydrangea. The enamel part is not important, but the color Hydrangea just seemed to match so well. So you really kind of want to go ahead and paint the inside of your towers. If you wait till later when the whole piece is done, it's not going to work out as well. It's harder to paint when it's actually done. All right, I need to mark this one down. I've marked it 3 inches from the end of the tube, and these are toilet tissue tubes or paper towel tubes would work too, wrapping paper tubes. You could also use like coffee cans or salt containers. Brie cheese comes in a nice cardboard container. Any cardboard can be used for upcycling into oven-baked clay projects. And that's because paper does not burn until over 400 degrees. So we can put this in the oven as a support for our oven-baked clay, which is just genius because then you're not spending a lot of money on extra, you know, armatures and things like that. All right, I have just a few marks at the 3-inch mark, and I'm going to use some tape. Any kind of tape will do. This is just masking tape, and all I'm doing is forming a line all the way around this tube from mark to mark, basically providing myself a straight line around a curved object. That's all I'm doing. Just making a straight line to cut by along a curved object. All right, now you could use an X-Acto knife or scissors, whatever makes you happy, and you'll want to go ahead and cut on this side of the tape so that you have your 3-inch tube. And both the top and the bottom of this are going to be covered, so if you get a little crooked, it's totally okay. I'm just removing a section so that I can get in here and cut. I might need to go down just a little bit more. So I'm just going to get going straight, and then as it comes away, it can spiral out. The scraps will spiral out, so. Okay, as soon as your tubes are cut, you want a 3-inch, a 4-inch, and a 5-inch if you're making the exact same setup that I have. If you're following along with my instructions, you want a 3, a 4, and a 5-inch tower. And I'm just going to pull some of this off and get it out of the way. Excuse me, sorry about that. Like I said, it doesn't have to be totally neat and straight. It just needs to be relatively neat and straight. I've got a little bobble right here that I want to remove. And then go ahead and paint these, the inside of these, so that the paint has time to dry. Okay, another step that we can do with our tubes is to coat them with oven-baked clay adhesive. And oven-baked clay adhesive is the perfect bond medium between any kind of bar clay, whether it be souffle or primo, even Sculpey 3, and porous items, because the oven-baked clay adhesive, it loves to leach right into the porosity of this paper tube, and it loves to, let me clean some of that up, it loves to bond to all oven-baked clays. So put that on there and then spread it out as best as you can. You don't want like bumps and ridges that will show through your veneers. You want this to be really, really flat if at all possible. And this just makes the perfect bond between the porous base and the clay sheets. And if you let this set overnight, it will actually leach right into the clay, just like I was talking about how liquid Sculpey leaches into the base clay. This will happen too with this oven-baked clay adhesive. It will leach into the cardboard. And the next day, if you left it overnight, the next day the cardboard would look a little bit shiny and a darker color. It wouldn't be slick anymore like this. It would be somewhat tacky, but it's still something that oven-baked clay loves to stick to. And after it's baked and they're all baked together, it just creates such a nice rigid background. It's those three together, the cardboard tube, the oven-baked clay adhesive, and the polymer clay veneer. They work so well together to create such a solid surface. Another way to use oven-baked clay adhesive is with wood. If you put a layer of oven-baked clay adhesive on wood, which is very porous, and then you put a background of primo or souffle over the top of that, it will just be so strong. So you could do that with trinket boxes or picture frames, anything that's wood. Now we're going to use the oven-baked clay adhesive later in our tower construction, so just keep that handy. And just keep spreading. You can go ahead and cover right away. You can cover the oven-baked clay adhesive. It does not have to leach in before you use it. It's just less movable. It's less movable if you're doing it wet than if you've let it seep in a bit and dry. All right, so while our veneers are leaching into the clay and while our towers are receiving their oven-baked clay adhesive, let's talk about the base that's needed to connect all the towers and to add support to the bottom. So I made this base on a saucer, and so I've left the saucer in place so that I can show you how you get it off the saucer, and then we'll use the saucer to start our base. We're going to put down a base of concrete, and then we're going to use a patchwork of scraps from our veneers to cover the saucer. So what I do, because in the oven the clay kind of likes to stick to ceramic, but not permanently. They just get along real well, but they don't stay that way forever. So what I do is I take a a blunt tool like this, and I find a little gap that I can put it in, and you'll hear a little release and a little creaking. Did you hear that? That's the clay coming loose. And so I chose to leave that on there so I could show you how easy it is to get it off. And there's the clean saucer that I used to construct the whole tower. And then you can see that the bottom of my whole design is the concrete souffle. I did not tint it, I just used straight concrete souffle and built the whole thing from there. So now this is ready to go again. I can reuse this same saucer. I'm going to clean it. I can feel that it has a residue of clay on it, just thin residue of clay particles, so I'm just going to clean that off. The clay sticks to it by static, so it's not permanent. It's just a temporary fix for getting a nice shape. Okay? So I have some concrete souffle all prepped here. This is a number 1 setting, and I want to cut a nice straight edge in it real quickly. That's going to be my binding edge because my concrete souffle won't go all the way across that dish in one pass. So I'm going to create a nice straight edge for binding 2 pieces together and make a neat seam. I'm going to put this on my saucer, and I'm going to make it this portion over here as small as possible, and then I'm going to close this up to where I can use this scrap to make my seam right here. Okay? Start in the middle as best as you can and work out with your fingertips, smoothing the clay into place. You want to try really hard not to trap air bubbles between this clay and the saucer. So use your fingertips to keep checking, making sure it feels smooth. And it'll work better again after we trim it. So once you have it initially bonded down enough that it's stuck, it'll stay. Then come back in with a blade and trim the edge. Just ride your blade all the way around the saucer, and it's kind of buckling up right there, so I just put it back down. And we'll get a nice neat finish. We'll have another opportunity to finish this really nicely, so don't worry about that too much right now. Just get your initial cut out. At this point now, you can really go in here with hand pressure and push that down into all the curves. This concrete sheet is going to be completely covered, so you don't have to worry about fingerprints or smudges or anything like that. This is what's giving strength to your entire tool caddy, is this base. That's why I left the concrete souffle at 1 thick on my pasta machine, because that combined with the number 3 that we use for our veneers is going to be really strong. I'm just cutting another really straight edge for the seam. I'm going to get my clay, excess clay out of the way, and I'll just go right up here and butt these together. And as I'm butting, I'm pushing that seam closed. You want them, you don't want any overlap, you just want them butted together, side to side. And then finger buff to close up that seam. Okay, do the same thing with your blade, right around the edge, and remove all the scrap. Okay. We'll save that scrap. We might use it in our decorative ropes that we put on later. All right, just smooth that all out and then set this aside for now. Next, we're going to work on covering our 3, our 4, and our 5-inch towers. We're going to cover the tallest tower first, which was the 6-inch, and that was this Gilder's Paste hexagon stencil. First, cut a very straight edge for our seam. and remove your excess. It's probably best to go ahead and cut a really straight edge on one side of the clay as well, since it's barely going to be, don't take much off, it's barely going to be enough because our pasta machine is 5 inches wide and our tallest tower is 5 inches. So, all right, we're going to line this up on the paper tube that has been coated with oven baked clay adhesive. And we're just going to run that around as gently and nicely as we can. Now you understand why we let the gilder's paste dry on the background clay. What I want to do is I want to roll this to make a seam mark. So where this seam touches the cardboard, I'm going to just gently impress that into the clay sheet itself. And then when I pull that back, I've got a nice neat line to cut along right here. Go in here with my blade and cut a very straight line just short of that line we just made, because polymer clay likes to stretch, and so if we cut a seam line there, chances are it's going to stretch. Now don't worry about that little excess gilder's paste, that kind of happens with this stuff. Just butt your seam as best as you can, seam to seam, and we are going to hide all these seams inside the construction of our tool caddy, so don't worry too much about those. And that looks really nice. Now what we want to do is, I'll start on, this is my, probably going to be my top side, probably. What I want to do is run my blade right around there and cut that extra off. I'm holding the tube with my 2 fingers in the other hand, just cut these, trim these back. Then make sure that these are stuck around the edge. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the base end. I've got my 2 fingers in the other end of the tube, and I'm just sliding my blade all around the top edge to cut a nice, neat trim. And we're going to cover this with a rope, so if you have some little bobbles and imperfections, that is fine. Just pinching the clay back to the tube, make sure it's sticking. And then we're going to do the exact same thing with our other 2 veneers. We have all 3 towers covered completely. The towers are basically done. We added the ribbon trims, the twisted rope trim, and the bead chain to each one. So those are done. Just set these aside for now. Now it's time to work on our base. So I'll bring that back in. So far we just have it covered with gray concrete, or yeah, the concrete color of souffle. And remember how I told you to save these patterned pieces? That's what we're going to use to help cover our patchwork on the base. Let me show you this base so that you can see. Down in here I just used patchwork pieces of all my leftover veneers, and between each veneer piece I added a thin line of the guava. The guava was not tinted. I just cut it into about 1/8 inch strips. Here's where it's also important that all the pieces we're using for our patchwork are sheeted to a number 3 like they were when we made the towers. That way they're all level and flat when they're used together. So first off, what I'm going to do with this piece, this is the biggest piece I have left over. I'm going to cut the edges of it to really angular shapes, straight lines, so it's super easy to border with that guava ribbon. They don't have to reach completely all the way across the dish, but angular lines are easier to use. So I'm going to let this one run this, let me move this back into the center. I'm going to let this narrow edge go all the way to the edge of my saucer, and then I'm going to tap this down right across here, and I'm not going to panic that it didn't go all the way across because I can put another patch there. So the first thing I want to do is cut some 1/8 inch borders of my guava to go right up next to that, because that'll be really pretty and help each patch have an offset to it. Okay, so just eyeballing 1/8 of an inch, because that's kind of how I roll, is just doing things by sight, not measuring. I'm going to lay this piece, and this is the exact same thickness as that veneer. I'm going to snug it right up to that one. These are all sheeted to number 3, which is fairly thin through your pasta machine. And this time I want my guava piece to go off the end like that. I'm not going to trim it or anything yet, because if I just leave it kind of loosely in place, then I can trim it later. We still have to deal with this piece. So let's cut another guava that's shorter to go across there. Again, eyeballing that 1/8 inch. I'm going to lay it in here along this edge. This is the fun part where if you have any sewing background or quilting or patchworking, this could be kind of fun. Okay. Now, if I leave it off like that, that would allow me to use like a larger piece that can run off the edge. And that could be handy for me. Let's pick another piece that has a square edge right there, like this one, and just snug it right up in there. And this is a beautiful start of a patchwork. Now, every person's patchwork is going to be a little bit different, because your scraps, this is all made from scrap veneers. Your scrap veneers are all going to be different than mine, depending on the shape of your original clay, you know, how big your towers are, all of that. So there's no rhyme or reason, no perfect way to do this patchwork for the base. You just have to go with what you have. And all your patches don't have to have a print on them. You could use solid patches too. Now I just want to go back and snug this into place. Okay, so that worked out really well, to leave that piece loose and let it run off the edge. I'm going to get some of my scraps out of the way. I'm going to address that piece, and then I'm going to set you free to go and start working on your base. And what we want to do is just cover this whole concrete base with veneers of patchwork. Here's my next piece. All right, the way I want to start this is I want to kind of have that angle right there mimicked, so that this piece can snug in there. And it looks pretty good. I'm just going to do a quick comparison and see if I can use that angle. And polymer clay is just so cool, because it's so stretchy and forgiving that you can always push a little angle into a piece or to adjust the angle. For now, I'm just tapping these down. I'm not seating them real close. And see how I'm coming up short right there? No big deal. I'm just going to stretch the clay as I tap, and it'll just stretch enough to go right to the end. If you want to, leave your ends overhanging, because we're going to come back and do a real nice final trim. Okay? So I want you to cover your whole concrete saucer with random patches like this one. And then when we come back, I'm going to show you how to set the towers in place. I'm going to remind you to do this exact same rope and bead chain, ball chain on the edges like we did up here. And then it'll be ready to bake after everything is hooked together. My patchwork saucer is all completely patched. I've even added the twisted rope and the ball chain around the edge. Now, if you want to refresh your memory on how to do the twisted rope and the ball chain, please just go back to that part of the video where we put those two elements at the top of each tower. And we did it the same way here. Just I trimmed all the scrap clay from the edge of the saucer, and then I had a nice flat surface to put my twisted rope to, and then I added the ball chain. I want you to double check that your ball chain is really seated, that the clay is kind of coming up between the balls and holding that chain part in place, and that the balls are, you know, slightly seated down in the clay. Another thing I want you to do before you go on is make sure that all your patches are seated really well in that concrete souffle base that we put on the saucer. You could go back to that part of the video where we covered this white saucer with concrete souffle and then we patchworked over the top. So as long as your veneers are all dry enough to touch, just go ahead and push on them really hard and make sure that they are seated nice and flat into that concrete base. We don't want any air bubbles to erupt. From this point on, it will be too hard to go back and work with this whole base. So this is your last chance to make it super flat. Okay, next we are going to set our towers in place in a little threesome of towers inside the middle of the tray. And so I'm going to start with the tallest one, the 6-inch. And remember, I talked about how we're going to hide that seam. So point the seam toward the middle of the saucer, and then we're going to set these in here lightly. We're going to look at it from all different angles before we actually put pressure to seat them. So this is the 5-inch tower here, and it has a seam as well, which I'm going to face toward the 6-inch tower, like so. So those two seams are completely hidden between each other. Then I'm just going to real gently set the 3-inch tower. So 5, 4, and 3. I've been saying this. I've been calling this one 6, but it's actually just 5. 5, 4, and 3. The 3-inch seam obviously is going to go in this nook here so that it doesn't show. But now, before I put any pressure or stick them down, I just want to look at it. I want to spin it and look at it from all angles. I want these to be, you know, totally upright, not leaning. They don't have to sit flat down on the saucer, like on the inside where the saucer's more, they're touching out here on the saucer, but kind of not in the middle. We're going to add this little rope detail, which I have on this finished one, to cover up the seam where the tower hits the saucer. So just adjust accordingly. You probably want to even look down on it from the top. I would like to do that, but I don't want to get my head in your way. Maybe you want to look down on it. I'll turn it toward myself and look at it from this angle to make sure that the spacing, make sure that the spacing on the outside of the towers to the edge of the saucer are very similar. So I'm going to put that one back where it was. Put these seam to seam, and this one seam in. Okay. Just look at it, make sure you like it. Okay, because now what we're going to do is we're going to actually push down on our towers to make them sit to the clay below. Just enough to hold them in place while we add our concealing rope around the base of the tower. So I've got a lot more of this rope rolled out that we used on the edge and on the top of the towers. And I like how this has an angle right here, because that will tuck really nicely in between two towers here at the base. And I'm also going to add some oven baked clay adhesive all the way around all 3 towers, right where they touch the saucer. Just try to make a thin bead. If your bead gets a little too thick, we'll try to deal with that as we apply the rope. Just keep going around. And this will actually really fill in that gap. If there's a gap between your tower and your saucer, this will help fill that in. It also bakes almost, I'd say it bakes translucent, not necessarily clear, but it does really kind of go invisible. All right, now I have that pointed end of my rope, and I'm going to stick it between those 2 towers. And then I'm just going to lay the rope down in that oven baked clay adhesive that we already sprinkled, or squirted, I should say. Just using some light fingertip pressure. I've got a blade handy, so when I get here, I need to cut this to a point and let it go in between those 2. towers. So I'm going to grab my needle tool and pick that up and just coax it on in there with my finger and my needle tool between these two towers. And I'm just setting it down in there with my needle tool. Then I want to start with another point and put that right up against that last rope and do the same thing again. Letting it lay right in that oven baked clay adhesive. And the cool thing about the oven baked clay adhesive is it can be lumpy like that, and it's just going to do a great job of holding all of that together. So now I'm ready to cut another point. Let me just do this with my needle tool. I can reach in there and cut my point. And then I can pick that up and coax it down into that gap. And now I need to start with another pointed end of my rope. This one I need a little narrower. I can see that gap is quite narrow, and I'm going to put that right in the place. Use my needle tool to coax it in. And then drip this around where it meets the oven baked clay adhesive again. So right here where I have oven baked clay adhesive pooling out, I'm not really concerned about that because it's going to kind of disappear as it bakes. All right, for this final seam, I want this one to be neat, so I'll just go in here with my blade and cut it at the same angle that it's going to meet up with that first rope, and take my needle tool and coax it in there. All right, let me get a tool that's a little more blunt and just kind of help that finish off. Here we go. Just grabbing any tool and just helping that finish. This is a good pushing tool for going around. But that oven baked clay adhesive is going to hold this all real solid. All right, before you bake it, please go do a once over. Look at all your rope trims, look at all your bead trims. This is your chance to clean up messes, to make it look neater, to buff out fingerprints and tool marks before you bake it. Now when you bake it, obviously this is quite tall, and so you may want to consider baking it in a taller oven. You want to bake this at 275 for 30 minutes. We don't have anything on here that's thicker than 1/4 inch, so that will be an adequate baking time. Maybe go right in here and squeeze the towers together where they touch. And I like it. So thanks for playing with me, and it's been a great project.